rebellion, destruction, and poverty. During the unrest after the death of Herod the Great, a small rebel army of the Zealots, led by Judas of Galilee, had taken Sepphoris, the capital of Galilee, by surprise. A large war supply was stored in the city, and it now fell into the hands of the Zealots. The inhabitants of the city offered absolutely no resistance, and the Zealots left with a large war booty, which they used in the following years to grow into a full-fledged resistance army. They sowed terror in Judea and Galilee. Their leader Judas made no secret that his goal was to restore the Jewish throne of David. Political sentiment in Jerusalem was explosive, and eventually, after much unrest and lobbying, Rome intervened, taking away the Tetrarch Herod Archelaus' throne. As a result, Judea became a Roman province. A governor was appointed and started taking a census to tax its inhabitants. This was too much for the Zealots, and they appealed to all Jews to join them. In their view, the census was the Roman way to enslave the Jews. But these Jews were not the property of the emperor, no, they were the chosen people of God. A great revolt broke out and was put down by the Romans, and after a long manhunt, Judas, the leader of the Zealots, was finally tracked down and put to death. The Romans wanted an act of deterrence to break the will of the Jews, and in revenge for the revolt, they destroyed Sepphoris. They chose Sepphoris because its inhabitants had not prevented the looting of the armories. The city was completely destroyed, 2,000 of its men were executed, and many of them died by crucifixion. This tragedy occurred several months after Joseph's death. Nazareth, which was only 7 kilometers south as the crow flies, was miraculously spared, but the atrocities traumatized the entire area. The many dead and the deliberate destruction of Sepphoris made a deep impression on the young Jesus. Although the real violence passed Nazareth by, he clearly saw the consequences of it. And his young consciousness could not understand why the conquering power deployed such cruel violence to set a terrifying example. With the destruction of Sepphoris, the local economy had collapsed, leaving few jobs, and Jesus' family, who had lost their main breadwinner due to Joseph's sudden death, was forced to dip into their savings. Under normal circumstances, Joseph's brothers and Mary's brothers would have helped financially, but they too were now out of work. Jesus tried, as wisely as possible, to handle the family expenses, and he proved to be a wise and knowledgeable administrator of his father's estate. He was now the breadwinner, but the daily wage of an apprentice carpenter was meager. The next year they found it difficult to pay the civil tax, not to mention the synagogue and temple taxes of half a shekel. A year later, when a tax collector came by to collect the tax, he threatened to squeeze additional revenues out of Jesus, even threatening to confiscate his harp. After this incident, the terror was in Jesus, and he feared that the next time his Greek scroll would be confiscated by the tax collectors. For this reason, he wisely decided to donate it to the synagogue library of Nazareth. Of necessity, the family had to cut back on everything. There was no money for new clothes, but there was always food, partly because they were self-sufficient in it. Depending on the season, they harvested whatever their garden produced. The lack of wealth, however, did not bring with it social inferiority among these Jews. Being so bound to the carpenter's workbench for those years, Jesus no longer found an opportunity to mingle among the caravan passengers. About this time he began to send his little brother James to the area where the camels were, to gather news of what was happening in the world, and in this way he tried to stay informed. Herod Antipas decided to rebuild Sepphoris, making it the capital of Galilee again. This brought plenty of work back to the area after a few years. But Jesus himself, however, always refused to work for Herod. As Jesus grew into adulthood, he lived in a fierce time. He underwent all the common conflicts and confusion that all young people go through, and in addition to losing his father at a young age, he also experienced the tragedy of war and destruction. However bad your situation may be, know that your Creator listens to you empathetically, for he knows from his own experience your earthly sorrows.